In 1994, Quaker Oats paid $1.7 billion for Snapple, an iced tea brand powered by fridge folklore and glass bottles and real facts. 3 years later, they sold it at a loss of $1.4 billion. That's not a misspoken statement. That's not a typo. That's what happens when corporate logic tries to play house with counterculture charm. This is a story of Snapple, a brand that thrived on radio, eccentricities, low budget loyalties, deli counters, and the inexplicable warmth of the Snapple Lady until it crashed into that buzzsaw that is executive overconfidence. Today, on Decisions at the Fulcrum, we're snappling our fingers together and presenting some real facts on decision making that end in the outcomes not readily apparent, yet nevertheless happen once again owing to some intriguing suppositions. We follow Snapple's rise from a niche oddity to a national darling. Its spectacular free fall under Quaker's sanitized strategy and its lingering aftertaste in pop nostalgia, as well as an overview of where it went from then. It's a case study in what goes wrong when branding is treated like a spreadsheet problem, when it's treated like only metrics. With side quests through Liz Moor's branding analysis, we ask this question: what if Snapple is only great when it doesn't scale? What if no one at a boardroom table ever understood that? And so, do you remember Snapple? They had weird trivia points under their caps. The voice Howard Stern on the radio swore that Mango Madness was a sacred beverage, a mood, it was a vibe, and then it wasn't all of a sudden. So, what happened? This is the story of how a $1 billion brand was built on personality, a sense of weirdness and uniqueness, and fridge door intimacy, only to be swallowed by a food giant that thought it could outgrow the identity of Snapple. From Howard Stern to grocery store shelves, from glass to plastic, from Wendy the Snapple Lady to aisle 7, this is Decisions at the Fulcrum. There was a time when Snapple lived in the fridge next to the register. The glass door fogged a little. Maybe a Sharpie sign said, "Try the Kiwi strawberry" or the lemon tea in shaky block letters. The person at the deli never asked really if you were a creature of habit when you came there. Maybe that person liked it too. They cracked one open when no one else was looking on their break. Maybe the delivery person stashed a few extras in the back fridge. Like we talked about in the LaCroix episode, it was another ecosystem. It was choreography. It was, I go to this deli every day, I get the same Snapple every day. And it lived in the real world in bodegas with those handwritten signs and the clink of the glass underneath the flickering fluorescence in the backseat of your daily routes and the familiar nods that people just understood it. So when Quaker Oats acquired Snapple in 1994, they had a very different impression. They thought that they were buying a hit beverage, which they were, but they didn't really understand what that meant. So they focused on the promise of it and how it could sell like Gatorade. So they saw it as Gatorade with a personality. So when Quaker Oats buys Snapple in 1994, they thought they were getting a beverage with a punchy little personality, something that is shelf stable, something that is a little sassy. Okay, let's get in our time machine. It's 1994. What do we see? Oh, the Snapple is cold. There's trivia under the cap. There's someone named Wendy and on the air. Wendy the Snapple Lady's on TV reading a letter about someone who drinks apple Snapple during bath time. You also own a CD player the size of a dishwasher. It's in the living room, maybe in the hallway closet. It's next to the vacuum. And it loads 5 different CDs at a time. Looks like you've got the Lion King soundtrack, you've got Green Day, you've got Ace of Base, and you've got a couple that were from the previous decade. There's a fat-free muffin there. Snackwell's Cookies is in the lunchbox that you're taking to your corporate job. You have a shirt that says Hakuna Matata because you're quoting. Oh, and by the way, you're also drinking peach tea and fully committed to that bit. Snapple is still glass, it's weird, and it's still exactly where it belongs. Now, so we can trace Snapple through this entire paradigm. Snapple wasn't just a drink, it was a media phenomenon. It thrived in the hands of unofficial intermediaries. From Howard Stern, who gave it that regional edge, to the deli culture, handwritten labels and real facts, through the eccentric flavors. And these intermediaries helped circulate a fantasy theme of Snapple as weird but real and honest. And maybe that's exactly what real and honest are. A brand that didn't need to be polished to be loved. When Quaker Oats bought Snapple in 1994, they thought that they were getting a beverage with a punchy personality. Like what they really bought, unbeknownst to them, to their own regret, I feel, they bought corner store nods and fridge door familiarity. They bought a drink that wasn't just consumed, it was trusted. Snapple wasn't is supposed to be scalable in the way that they imagined it being like Gatorade. Its power wasn't corporate, it was communal, it was local. Let's go through some of the classics that lived under the caps just real briefly. For people who shopped at the local markets or the 7-Elevens, let's see, we've got Real Fact number 78. Real Fact number 78. Dolphins sleep with one eye open. Yes, half their brains stay awake, just like mine does during meetings. Oh, look at that. Elephants are the only animals that can't jump. Good for them. Someone had to opt out of that, right? Kangaroos can't walk backwards, and neither can Quaker Oats financial department, apparently. You can almost hear people shaking their head. The soft reverence in every word. I'm gonna pivot now a little bit, talking about Snapple. It wasn't just a drink, right? It was people who kind of made it matter. It was the deli person who stocked that Kiwi strawberry like it was sacred inventory. It was the Snapple rep who sort of thought that that new flavor was local gossip, and it lived on the air as well as in those in those deli fridges, right? So this wasn't a marketing funnel. Snapple in 1994, when it was purchased, right? We can look at what happened with Quaker and Snapple by looking at Liz Moor, who's a scholar on branding, sort of a vibes decoder, an intellectual locksmith, said that brands don't actually speak for themselves. Brands don't represent something on their own. They need to be interpreted, mediated. They need to be woven into our daily lives by a web of people in between the marketing department, the corporate office, and the sales numbers, right? By designers and store owners and delivery folks and media personalities and a consumer with good taste and a favorite flavor. And Moore calls this intermediation. Moore would probably say that what I feel is that the soul of a beverage like Snapple has been really dismantled by Quaker Oats. What happened was when Quaker rolled in with bad instincts and maybe good intentions, but okay. They tried to blueprint the magic onto a scalable plan. They pulled Snapple from spots where it had always belonged, and they shelved it next to strangers in aisle 7 with that logic of grocery store aisles. Really not very logical at all. So that ritual was gone. It had been evicted from those fridges. The wink and the nudge of discovery is now replaced with now on sale stickers and flavor charts that no one really asked for. No one was really interested in that because you can't scale interest, right? It has to come about organically. The voices were silenced, the personality was flattened, the trivia, the charm, and the really spontaneity of it all was buried beneath barcodes in aisle 7. Basically, it got scaled into the large grocery. Instead of a living rhythm, we got a shelf, a spreadsheet, a lonely SKU, and metrics. Quaker didn't just brand Snapple, right? They displaced it. And they took something that was ritualized and live and loved and known and tried to manage it like a filing cabinet. Liz Moore is a British scholar, senior lecturer, media and communication at Goldsmiths and the University of London, and Moore's work has really been very influential in how we understand branding as a cultural and a communicative phenomenon. I'll just go over some of the main aspects of this to kind of give the groundwork, like something holds the entire narrative together. Brand consultants act as mediators. How people translate their own values, they project that into the visuals and that guiding practice, and they in turn shape how the product, like Snapple, acquires meanings. In her book, The Rise of Brands, she looks at abstract and experiential, symbolic nature of different iconic brands and how those are intertwined into media and intellectual property and trade regimes. Moore has said that the economy lives in everyday communication, in our banknotes, in our pricing algorithms, in our workplace talk, and even in the way that we save our money and receive our money, right? Media and communication shape financial and economic life in pervasive and subtle ways. The sociocultural performances, I'm going to come out of my professor mode here in just a second, is not just about visuals and logos. It's enacted through the interactions among the designers and the store owners, like those deli people at the deli, and the consumers, like the person who loved kiwi strawberry and still remembers what it smells like, and the media. So the economy is communication, centering communication from the payment to the narrative as the medium through which economic life finds form. And more scholarship reframes brands as lived experiences. Long before influencer marketing had a name, before hashtags even, before discount codes and bios, Snapple was building something strange, ahead of the curve. But they weren't doing it in glossy magazines even. They weren't even doing it on billboards. They weren't even doing it on television until a little bit later. But they were doing it on Howard Stern.
Show you some Snapple. Some of the Snapple products I've been talking about on the radio for years, and now they're a sponsor of ours on television. This is Snapple Diet Iced Tea. Bells, you want to try? Oh, you already have one? Jessica, try the iced tea. I drink the lemonade, Howard. Natural tea. They don't add anything to it. They don't add any sugars. No soda, right?
No, right.
I drink about 47. Okay. Let me say something about this bottle of fruit punch. See this fruit punch here? This has no artificial coloring in it. This is all the natural color of the fruit.
Snapple didn't just buy ads on the Howard Stern show, though. They became a recurring character. He would talk about Snapple the way you talk about your weird roommate. He'd sort of crack open that bottle on air. He'd argue about the flavors. He'd make fun of the branding. And it wasn't really a pitch. It was just a bit. Snapple became part of the show's texture. It was woven into the chaos of that early to mid 90s radio. It was loud. It was offbeat. It was memorable. And Snapple understood is that a brand doesn't need to be explained. It wasn't polished. It wasn't focus grouped even. It was Howard Stern drinking a Snapple, joking about it, and that felt real. And so that's one part of it. The other part of it, though, was their ads. There was Wendy the Snapple Lady.
Today I got a letter from a retired colonel from Kentucky. Snapple is a super product, perhaps the only good that has ever come out of New York. I got a letter from Michael Lesage. I'm getting married in June. I would like to lay in a supply of Snapple for the wedding. It's so romantic.
Well, we got married in April and put on the outside invitation featuring Snapple natural beverages.
And I said, why not? We're having fun.
Wendy the Snapple Lady was a real Snapple employee turned radio talk folk hero who became part of the show's inner universe. Because she wasn't a spokesperson necessarily, that she was just that intermediary, that bridge between the company and the audience. And it was narrative co-authorship. Snapple gave Howard Stern a bottle, and Howard Stern gave it a personality. And in hindsight, it was what we would call influencer marketing today. But I mean, the playbook is exactly the same. It's been around for a really long time. Even before the 90s, it's been around. To Wendy Kaufman, who worked at Snapple in the customer relations department in the early 90s, she would answer letters from customers long before brands had social media managers. She was known for writing back personally. In 1993, Snapple was really looking for a way to humanize their ads, something a bit offbeat but real. And instead of hiring a spokesperson, though, the agency decided to bring in Wendy herself. So she wasn't pretending to be aspirational. She was just being Wendy, and that was totally enough, right? And it mattered because she blurred the lines between the employee and the mascot, right? When Quaker acquires Snapple in 1994, they fail to understand the network of cultural intermediaries that made Snapple work. They pull it from the shelves, they pull it from the convenience stores and the delis, and they erode those material sites. And so in Moore's terms, Quaker overestimates its role as the sole author of meaning, and they ignore the social infrastructure that had already shaped Snapple's appeal. Tried to make it something that it wasn't, in other words. And so Snapple, as a result, there's a huge collapse of the narrative, and there's a collapse of sales as well. Like I said at the beginning, they end up losing $1.4 billion, which is just staggering when they sell it. Snapple becomes untethered from its cultural intermediaries. People didn't just stop buying it. They rejected Quaker's imposed identity of it. They were like, no, we don't want this. We don't want this. We didn't ask for this. And we're not doing this. Through Moore's approach, we see that removing the brand from its network of meaning making was the serious flaw at the fulcrum, the serious decision that cost Quaker $1.4 billion. And in aisle 7, it's just another thing that you scan. And so the Quaker crash and burn exit is one of the most spectacular flameouts in branding history. Because in the corner store, the Snapple cap was a punchline. It was a conversation. When a brand moves from a place of ritual and recognition to one of efficiency and anonymity, it loses more than the sales, although they lost that too. They also lost the texture, they lost the playfulness, they lost the memory of it. When the space changes, when the place changes, by extension, the brand also changes. Okay, so real fact number 502. Snapple is purchased in 1997 by Triart Companies. Yes, the same one that owned Arby's. Snapple's been repositioned with the help of the firm Cliff Freeman and Partners. Freeman and Partners is known for their surreal and ironic humor, right? They did the ads for Little Caesars, Pizza Pizza. They did Where's the Beef with Wendy's. And Snapple begins to run ads that are in the same sort of weird as what we do, and you need to deal with it. Quaker is out. They are now $1.4 billion lighter, and their spreadsheets are still smoking from this disaster. The ad campaigns that were run by Freeman and Partners were not trying to turn Snapple into Gatorade. They didn't want to nationalize the brand, right? They wanted to lean into that weird. So they were hired to sort of do these ads where Snapple was sort of rediscovered. It's done so through Snapple elements: rain, fire, earth, and Snapple. So the elements line were rain, fire, sun, and earth flavors, right? And these reintroduced the strangeness and the uniqueness of Snapple. You probably didn't understand what you were drinking. I liked the elements when I was a kid, and those elements were like really a whole mood of that period. So you had rain, apparently agave, cactus fire. That was my favorite one. I loved rain. That was definitely my favorite one. The labels had those cosmic vibes. They sounded like they weren't concerned about being. The product line was really a perfect example of how Snapple was able to regain that ambiguity that had made them so successful. From 1997 to 2002, they launched this line of drinks that allowed you to write a new story. By 2002, when Cadbury purchased them, and then by 2008, when Dr. Pepper purchases Cadbury, and they're repackaged as Dr. Pepper Snapple, so they're now like on the headline. And by this time, they've been passed around like a corporate hot potato. Snapple just keeps getting shuffled through these different conglomerates, like something that they should. This is kind of where Snapple sort of comes in to their own with the Dr. Pepper group, and from there we'll see what happens after that. By 2008, Snapple is doing something strange. That's kind of who they are. They're like, let us just be Snapple. We don't need to be a big brand. We just want to be Snapple. So after being passed around and dropped and rebranded and then weirded up again, they didn't just survive. They didn't have their name on the door. They were then Dr. Pepper Snapple Group. Part of Dr. Pepper, that's the letterhead. That's the investor call. That's the soda summit. A 19th century Texas pharmacist and a New York iced tea in a glass bottle are now a roommate. It made sense because you're with that roommate that minds their own business, and they let you mind your own business. And Dr. Pepper was always kind of that non-cola, the soda that didn't make a lot of sense with 23 flavors. Although there's definitely amaretto in there and vanilla. Snapple was the tea that really never wanted to make sense either. They are legacy brands by this point. They're both outliers. And Snapple now has a home and they have a place at the dinner table where they're more or less a little bit comfortable. Under Dr. Pepper Snapple, went back to what they did best. They went back to the timeless iced teas. They went back to the fruit mixes that packed a serious nostalgic punch. They went back to real facts under the cap. Established in the 1800s, and Snapple, established in the 1970s, didn't get famous until late 80s, early 90s. They're very literally companies from two different centuries. When they have a new lease together, they are coming to the party together. This era didn't reinvent Snapple, and so those real facts and the strange cultural gravity of it was now no longer about growth. It was about recognition. It was a brand that had become a part memory. It wasn't necessarily forward facing, it wasn't flashy, but it was retained by this point. They didn't chase LaCroix or Red Bull or coconut water with Dr. Pepper Snapple Group, and that was enough because they weren't selling lifestyle anymore. They were now just present. So that's 2008 to around 2018. All right. And then in 2018, the room changes again. Dr. Pepper Snapple Group merges with Keurig Green Mountain, the coffee pot empire, and they form, now it's Keurig Dr. Pepper, a hybrid titan of caffeine, carbonation, and quiet consolidation. And Snapple is now in a much larger home with a lot of new faces, right? But then, it still holds on. It's there long enough so that you remember what kiwi strawberry smells like. I do, for sure. Snapple in the early 2020s is kind of like that sitcom that that your older relative used to watch, and they still watch the reruns on. It was syndicated at 4:30 though. It was wedged between the shows that you like better, but somehow stuck. You never really set out to love it. And it didn't really set out to love you either. But years later, you still know that it's made from the best stuff on earth. You still quote Wendy, not everything should scale. Some things can resonate. They can linger. When a company trades meaning for efficiency, sometimes all that's left is a plastic bottle and a feeling that something used to be there. So this gets us into what happened when they switched from the glass to plastic. And this symbolic switch began in 2020, phasing out their iconic glass bottles. By 2021, most retailers carry Snapple exclusively in plastic. So this environmental positioning, supposedly environmental, I mean it's plastic, framed it as an eco-friendly shift, lighter bottles, lower emissions, all of this. Okay. And also the plastic is cheaper and it's less prone to breakage. They now offered the potential efficiency gains. Glass, it was also part of that narrative. It was part of that brand. It was part of what the intermediaries cited. It was a tactile memory. In other words, it was a tactile form of communication. And for a lot of longtime Snapple drinkers, switching to plastic felt kind of like Quaker Oats again. And so was that a good idea? Well, it really depends on who you ask. One of the important changes in 2020, though, was their switch from glass bottles to plastic. The glass bottle was more than their mere packaging. It was part of their statement. It was like Snapple's handshake. It was solid, it was cozy, it was oddly familiar and comforting. An invitation to, that's cool, some fun Snapple flavors, and it gave the drink that vibe of being cherished and not peddled. The bottle really made that cheerful clink when you set it down. It split light into tiny rainbows if you wanted it to, if you put it in just the right place. It created a sound that, and then you clanked your glasses together, right? The glass exuded that grand, unyielding stillness, and it packed a punch of significance. And so it felt kind of like clutching a miniature stained glass masterpiece, not quite fit for a cathedral, but perfect for your workspace, for your car's cup holder, for your mind's eye. When Snapple made that leap, though, when they made that shift to plastic bottles, again, they were claiming something that they didn't really understand. Didn't really make that sound anymore. It didn't sparkle in the fridge. It didn't have the prism of light. It was just waiting to be thrown away into recycling, hopefully. The glass where the handshake, right? The plastic is like that casual shrug you give when you can't really be bothered. It was cookie cutter lettering now, ready to roll. It broke that memory loop, basically. The real facts were still hanging around, but now they seemed more like the museum pieces, right? And the plastic bottle didn't exactly spark a nostalgia trip. Snapple didn't just misplace the bottle, it dropped a chunk of its language. It dropped a bunch of its narrative. And basically, by the early 2020s, it had largely phased out those glass bottles for most consumer retail, and Snapple did not disappear in any singular moment of rupture. It drifted, an incremental dislocation from cultural immediacy to nostalgic residue, from the presence that it had to an echo, from an icon to an artifact. The brand migrated from that embodied personality to a commodified product, from the eccentricities of localized charm to the hygienic neutrality of the wellness adjacent brand. The story of Snapple was first one of collapse with Quaker, but now it's one of more temporal fade. It didn't really get removed from shelves necessarily, it just got moved around a lot. It got converted a lot. And yet, if you re-engage the bottle with the right sensory orientation, right, where the cap spins with that satisfying resistance, and it might trigger something beyond taste. You might hear that echo of the fridge door swinging open, and you might recall that offbeat real fact number 700, or that micro ritual of holding it up to read without spilling it. You might feel the bite of those peach tea that's a little bit too sweet. The synthetic burst of fruit flavor. It prompted discussion, it prompted imitation, it prompted some jokes, it prompted some resistance. And in this way, Snapple resists neat classification as a case study in brand management. It was not successfully optimized. It was not success, but it belonged to a category of cultural objects whose value derives from resonance instead of reach. And these are things that do not perform well in slideshows or on spreadsheets that people seem to cling to. They don't promise growth, but they do offer recognition and familiarity. And such artifacts refuse the logic of infinite expansion. They linger like background music that you can't really name, but you remember what kiwi strawberry smelled like. They remained stored in that architecture or in that refrigerator, in that cognitive refrigerator. So when an organization prioritizes operational efficiency over cultural meaning, when it replaces the textured and the temporal with the templated and the transactional, it creates not just failure, although it does that too, also creates a sense of evacuation from the brand. And what remains is a residue, a plastic bottle on a shelf that used to hum with character, a brand that used to whisper, "Remember me," is now not really saying that much at all. So from wisdom that was sealed in a glass bottle to trivia that was now laminated in shrink wrap, Snapple is still available. The version of it you find more refreshing, though, I'll leave up to you. Thanks for listening. This has been Decisions at the Fulcrum.